All right. Hello, and welcome back to the 101 Fantasy Football Show on YouTube. I am your host, Sawyer, and I'm excited to get back into it. We haven't been back, or I haven't been back in a long time now. The last time I checked in, we were doing some rookie breakdowns and some looking at the schedule. And obviously, this offseason's been a little bit different now with COVID and with all these opt-outs and things. There's been a lot of moving pieces. We weren't sure if there was going to be a season, but at this point, things are looking good. It sounds like we're probably going to have a season. Fingers crossed on that one. But with that said, now I've been able to update my projections. I've been working on this project for a while now. If you have followed me on Twitter, my Twitter is at Sawyer_FF. You can go check it out there. I've been doing these projections, projecting out every team, statting out all the teams, and posting them on there. So this will kind of be the first time I wanted to do something a little bit different. I wanted to just kind of show you behind the scenes of what that looks like, and I'm going to walk through the teams division by division, break down each team both in terms of what they look like this year and in what they look like in the long term, their dynasty outlooks, and hopefully I can give you some nice information tidbits that you can take away into your drafts, whether that be dynasty or your redraft leagues coming up soon here. With the season coming with less than a month now. That's crazy to think, but less than a month till game one, which is super exciting. So what you can see here, this is my spreadsheet. So within my spreadsheet, these are the rankings that we're looking at now, but we're going to be jumping into the AFC East today. So that's going to be the Buffalo Bills, the New England Patriots, the Miami Dolphins, and the New York Jets. And I don't think there's anything else we need to cover. We'll come back to these overall rankings at the end, and I'll give you just a look at kind of all the pieces that we talked about today, all the players I talked about. But let's just jump right into it. So when I look at the AFC East this year, realistically, I think the Buffalo Bills are the strongest team. The Patriots, they were looking pretty decent, but they got a decent amount of opt-outs now. They got a couple major pieces that are opting out for the season. And so I think the Buffalo Bills are the headliner team in the division for this year. This is their chance to take over from the reign of the New England Patriots and have a chance to be the number one seed there. So let's take a look at them first. We'll jump into what they look like. So here's the top. We got the Bills. So this is what my projection sheets look like. So a lot of what you're seeing, I'm posting is a summary of all this. But I want to just show you kind of everything that's going on in the background, just because I feel like it's more open of me to show you everything. And then if you have any questions about something specific, you can ask me instead of me just giving you a final number at the end. So what we're looking at here, first off, the top here, this is kind of what I see for the overall offense this season. I've got them projected for 993 attempts, splitting that with 47 or 48% really rushing and 52% passing attempts. Those are up here. And, you know, that's not too far off from what they were last year. I think they're going to be one of the best teams in the division, if not the best team, fairly solidly. And so I think they're going to be winning a good chunk of their games. And so a team like that, they want to run the ball. They're going to have leads towards the end of games. They're going to be able to run out the clock. I think it's probably fair to assume they're going to be having a good chunk of rushing yards or rushing attempts out of their total offensive attempts. And so that's how that breaks down. So what that looks like then is 475 rush attempts and 518 pass attempts. I'm not going to break down every single thing. I just wanted to explain that. I'm not going to break down all the numbers. You can see kind of what we're looking at. So at the top, Josh Allen, got him for 16 games played. His rushing attempts are slightly down just because I think as a team, we've seen many times quarterbacks who run the ball over their first few years, they tend to run it more as a rookie. And as they develop more as a passer, teams want to get them throwing the ball a bit more just to protect them, try to keep them healthier for longer. So that's why that's the way it is. I do have his completion percentage going up a bit. Overall, though, you can see all these things here. So completion percentage, touchdown percentage. We're not going to talk too much about Josh Allen because we're going to get into something that I think is a bit more interesting, which people seem to be talking about a lot right now on Twitter, and that is the running back split in Buffalo. So you got two guys. You got Devin Singletary, guy who was a rookie last year. He was pretty dynamic. He was fun to watch, that's for sure. And then you got Zach Moss coming out of Utah, a guy they took in the third round. When you look at both of their draft capitals, these are both third-round guys, so it's not like they've invested really more into one over the other. So, you know, trying to figure out the split, I think a lot of people, you'll see people that say it's Zach Moss. It'll be Zach Moss taking over everything. And then you'll see the Singletary truthers that say, well, Zach Moss, you know, the only people we've seen him play against is Pac-12 defenses, and Singletary did it against NFL defenses last year. So I think I kind of land in the middle. Something you'll see at the end there is kind of my rankings and compared to the ECR. We'll get into that later, but this is kind of how I see it. I think, yes, maybe it's a fairly conservative approach to what I see happening, but this is how I feel like, or this is what I feel most confident in for the upcoming season. So I've got Devin Singletary for 190 rushing attempts, and I've got Zach Moss for 168. So you'll see the market share. That's a 40 to 35% market share. So fairly even split, but I think Singletary is going to get especially more of the work early on in the year. As it's been talked about, there's no preseason games. And so without preseason games, it's harder for rookies to supplant the people that are above them right now. So Zach Moss, right, he's not going to have an actual NFL game until the game one of the regular season. And I just don't think you're going to be throwing him out a ton and sharing the backfield load. And so I do think Singletary is going to get more of the touches early on in the season. And then throughout the year, I do think it'll kind of become more of a 50-50 balance. I would say I'm a pretty big Devin Singletary believer, and I thought, I was pretty confident they were going to draft someone this year. And so when they drafted Zach Moss, I actually thought it was a good fit. I thought they actually are a decent complement to each other, although some of their skill sets are similar. Their body types are a bit different, and the way that they create missed tackles is a little bit different, right? So Zach Moss, yes, he's elusive, but he also creates it with power. Singletary is more elusive and not as much powerful. So they can be kind of a complementary options for each other. And so I think it's actually a pretty good fit for a pair of running backs who can give you kind of two different looks when you're on offense for the Bills. So I like them both. I think that's how the rushing split's going to break down. When it comes to targets, a lot of rumors out of camp is that, or not out of camp, but with beat writers in Buffalo, they're saying that they think Singletary will get more targets this year, but I just don't know if I can see his targets per game going up when he's actually not a very strong receiving back. He doesn't score very well in a lot of those metrics. And so you'll see here, he had 41 in 12 games last year. So I have him going to 53 and 16, but that's not really a boost in terms of targets per game. That's just kind of extrapolating what he had last year across the full 16, which I think is more realistic, especially with Bean's comments that Singletary is going to have similar role to what he had last year, and Moss is going to have a similar role to what Frank Gore had. So this is how I see it breaking down this season. We'll get more into Dynasty down the road, but yeah, so I think Singletary will still be the better asset to have this year. But towards the end of the year, I think the split will be starting to get closer to even, and overall right now, on the season, only a 40 to 35% market share for each of them in terms of carries. So that's the running backs. Let's jump now into the receivers. You'll see everyone I've got listed here. Obviously, Stephon Diggs. He's the big name in Buffalo this year, the big acquisition in the offseason. But I wanted to talk about him. You can see how the other ones score out. John Brown, Cole Beasley, they're not going away. They're going to be pieces in this offense this year, and that's the way I see it. I don't think there will be much coming from Gabriel Davis or Isaiah McKenzie or Isaiah Hodgins this year. Really, I think it's going to be mainly those three guys on the field. So barring any injuries, we're not going to project for that. It's hard to project an injury. We're really going to be projecting that it'll be Diggs, Brown, and Beasley on the field. And so what does that mean for Stephon Diggs? That's kind of a big question mark this year. For me, the way I see it, Stephon Diggs, he is a polarizing player because in terms of talent, if you follow the reception perception by Matt Harmon, Stephon Diggs scores extremely, extremely well in the reception perception. And that's a good way to kind of evaluate how a player is in terms of their route running and how they can win in different routes. And so Stephon Diggs is actually a very talented receiver when it comes to that. However, Stephon Diggs is coming from the Minnesota Vikings, where a similar system. They're going to be running the ball about the same. They want to be a run-heavy team. They're playing in that cold. Well, actually, no, they're indoors. But still, they tend to be that like run-heavy offense built around the running game. So that's why Dalvin Cook was so good. And they limit the amount of passes. Although they have Kirk Cousins, who's a very talented NFL quarterback, they don't like to pass the ball a ton, at least not last year with their new offensive advisor, I think it was, who's now becoming their offensive coordinator. So he's coming into a system that's not going to have maybe more targets to go around, or if we're talking about, like a pizza, sometimes you can have the same percentage of the pizza, but it's a bigger pizza, and so you'll get more targets, whereas this is kind of different. It's still going to be the same size, and then within that, he's getting the same percentage of targets. In my mind, I don't think his target share is going to go up a ton. And so you look over on the right here, I've got his target share percentage being pretty much exactly the same as what it was last year in Minnesota. And what that means is it would be 114 targets based on my projections. Now, the problem with those targets is those are going to be less accurate targets. Josh Allen was one of the worst, if not the worst, NFL quarterback in terms of completion percentage last season, who was a primary starter, not anyone who was coming in as a backup, but someone who was the week 1 starter and he was the primary starter for his team. Kirk Cousins, on the other hand, was top 5 in terms of quarterback accuracy. So you're seeing a big difference here between the accuracy between the quarterbacks. And so although Stefon Diggs may get the same amount of targets, I do think he's not going to be able to catch as many, as good as he is, just because his quarterback will not be as accurate throwing him the football. And so that's going to result in a lower catch percentage, which overall kind of brings down the upside that Stefon Diggs has, or the projection that I have for him. It brings down the projection I have for him for sure going into this year. So you'll see I only have him at 170 half PPR points. That's kind of how I like to use half PPR rankings mostly, because whether you're in PPR or standard, it's not going to vary too much. So yeah, I'm a bit lower on Stefon Diggs for that reason this year. He still stats out for a decent season, but I don't have him going over 1,000 yards. I don't have him collecting a lot of touchdowns. And so, yeah, I don't have him scoring a ton of fantasy points for your team. Tight ends, not much to talk about here. Dawson Knox, it's going to be slight improvement, I think, for him off last year, but they do bring in more targets with Stefon Diggs coming in and no one of significance really leaving. So it's going to be hard for him to take a massive step forward. And so I've got him going up 10 targets. So kind of what does that mean? What does that mean? What do those numbers mean? Here is what it looks like for the Bills in terms of where I have them ranked and compared to ECR. Not anything that is very crazy different. I've got Singletary kind of as your it would be best to have Singletary as your RB3. He could maybe squeak by as an RB2, but he's probably more of a flex play this year. Zach Moss, I actually am much higher on Moss. Not much higher, but a decent amount higher than the consensus ranking. I think he's actually going to be someone that towards the end of the year, especially, you're going to be able to flex him into your lineups. Josh Allen, skipped over him there, but just a solid QB1 this year. Whether you're scoring his 4-point or 6-point, I think he's a guy you can rely on. Stefon Diggs, I'm a little bit lower on him than the consensus. So 30, I'm 30 for standard. I've got him at 30 instead of the ECR 27. I've got him 31st in half point, where ECR has him at 27. And I got him 34th in PPR, where ECR has him at 27. So I'm slightly lower on him, but it does seem like everyone is somewhat on board. There's some hesitancy around Stefon Diggs for the upcoming season. John Brown, he's still a solid pickup. Could be a flex play for your team. Cole Beasley, he's green. I've highlighted him green because I'm higher on him in terms of projections. However, I think the reason he's ranked where he is because you don't get that major, immense upside with Beasley. Beasley's not going to go out and get you those 20-point weeks. And so although I have him highlighted in green, I wanted to show that I am higher on him in terms of the projected points are higher. And I do think he will finish around 60-ish or in the 60s. I do think there will be guys you can draft who I would have projected slightly lower, who have more upside to explode that you maybe want to be targeting later in your drafts. Dawson Knox, nothing super special. Now, that is the season preview for the Bills, and so that's what I'm going to be doing for every team. But on top of that, we also have the Dynasty Outlook. I've just put together a small kind of table to show you what this team looks like for the long term. So quarterback, it's going to be Josh Allen locked up. They've got 3 years left because they'll probably accept his 5th-year option the way he's been playing. They do like him there. And then he'll probably sign a long-term deal. I would expect for now, when you're building your Dynasty team, you want to probably only use max a 5-year window, but I kind of like to think of like a 3-year window. So for the time being, it's going to be Josh Allen at quarterback. In terms of running backs, Singletary and Moss both have lots of time on their deal. So I do think it's going to be, how does this split shake out? And I think they can just be complementary roles. And I think we're seeing more teams shift towards that. And so, I mean, while Josh Allen's there, there's not going to be tons of carries to go around, but this team loves to run the ball and they're going to have high volume running or rushing for multiple years, I believe. So I don't think you need to completely avoid either of these players. I think actually they're pretty fair to what their price is in the Dynasty community right now. But I think neither one is going to be able to give you really solid RB2 numbers that you'll be comfortable with for the next few years until we see how this shakes out. So it's going to be the two of them. We're just going to have to see what that really looks like with the two of them this year and kind of adapt when we see that. So so that's kind of what we're looking at with the running backs. The receivers, realistically, it's going to be Diggs, Brown, and Beasley for a while, which makes it tough because Gabriel Davis and Isaiah Hodgins are both rookies that I thought were pretty solid rookie receiver prospects. And the Bills drafted them to kind of give them some size in their wide receiver room. Obviously, Diggs, Brown, and Beasley are not big guys, but it's going to be tough for them to really carve out a role over the next few years. And then Dawson Knox, I do think he'll develop into something pretty good. But as we said before, it's really hard for him to get targets right now with Diggs coming in this year, or much more targets. And so we'll have to see. He's definitely a long play stash, someone you're probably going to be looking for to be more useful in his third or fourth year, not his second year coming up this year. So that's kind of the outlook for the Bills for this year, as well as their dynasty outlook. And that's kind of what we're going to be doing. And I'm going to break those down for every single team. So that's the Bills. Let's jump on to the Miami Dolphins. The Miami Dolphins, they're actually an interesting offense to me for fantasy in 2020. I don't think so. Well, let's start with the coaches. So they've got Brian Flores coming back, and they bring in Chan Gailey. So Chan Gailey has been kind of out of the NFL for a couple of years now, but now he's back. And I don't think this team is going to be very, very solid this year, but I also don't think they're going to be as bad as they were last year, at least on paper. They did pull off 5 wins despite what their team looked like on paper, which credit to Flores for what he was able to do there. I do actually like him a lot as a head coach, and I think he'll have a solid future. And I think Miami's future is bright. But let's take a look now kind of what that means for this season. So because I don't think they're going to be amazing, and we're looking at the type of team this is, they don't have a great offensive line. They're still working on that. They don't really have elite running backs. They've got Howard and Breida, two guys that I think are good, and they brought them both in. And I think they're good talents. They both brought them in this year, and I think they're good complements for each other. Howard being a power guy, Breida being a smaller, like electric speed type of guy. So I think they're a great complement for each other. And it'll create an interesting dynamic that fantasy owners need to watch this year. So first off, I guess we'll jump into quarterbacks. It's a tough split. I personally wouldn't be starting Tua depending on health. I mean, I would want to sit him for a bit just to give him that more time with that hip. This is going to be your franchise piece, but all reports sound like he's actually completely healthy, and he's going to be good to compete for that starting job. So I would still think Fitzpatrick starts. The reason I have it as 10-6 right now is because that's when their bye week would come in. Fitz would play the first 10. They have a bye week. Tua comes in after that for 6. But I could definitely see, as this offseason has been going on, I've been starting to maybe think it's going to be Tua earlier than that. So that's kind of where the quarterbacks are broken down for now. Neither guy's really a redraft target for me. But definitely Tua is an awesome dynasty piece to have. At the running back position, this one's going to be interesting because you can pick up these guys for pretty cheap. And I think when we're looking for guys who can be values in different years, you want to have guys who are coming from uncertainty. That's where you find value. When there's uncertainty around a backfield, or there's just a new situation somewhere overall, like in a wide receiver room or quarterbacks, a lot of times that's what drops their value, is that uncertainty. And then when you draft them at a value, one of them is going to be able to explode and become, or not always, but sometimes you'll have one of them break out and explode, and then they become that value. You look at last year, Devontae Parker, it was kind of a new situation, new head coach. He got re-signed. People didn't want to trust it, but there were new pieces involved. Preston Williams was going to be there. And he ended up breaking out because there was some uncertainty around it. He was a value pick. Preston ends up going down. He ends up being the last guy standing. Fitzpatrick actually turns out to be a good quarterback who comes in pretty early in the year, ended up getting a good chunk of games. And then you get a value pick in Devontae Parker, who becomes a top 12 fantasy wide receiver. And so that's how you kind of find value. And so I do think this is actually a place where we're going to find value this year. Question is figuring out who. And right now, I'm starting to lean Matt Breida. But let's break it down in terms of the numbers. I do think Jordan Howard is going to have a higher market share. News from beat reporters out of Miami this week, actually, is that market share is going to be roughly, or projected to be roughly, 50% carries for Howard and 35% Breida, which is actually pretty similar to what I have. I've got 46% to Howard, 35% to Breida. I do have a few carries going to the quarterbacks that maybe they don't have happening, but I see it that way. And so in terms of carries, what does that shake out to be? I don't think they're going to run the ball a ton. So I don't think Howard's going to get, I don't think he'll crack 200. There's a chance he gets there. He'll be probably high 100s, though, in my opinion. And I think Breida, 135, I think is a safe bet. He's going to get a couple touches a game. He'll get some carries every game, but he won't hit 10 a game. I don't think he'll average that. This is more like 8-ish a game that he'll be averaging. And I think he can be explosive with those touches, but only with some of them, because this is he's coming from a different system, right? We look at Matt Breida. He had a great yards per carry in San Francisco, but in Miami, they have not a strong offensive line. And so we're looking at a guy who you can see here, his yards per carry last year, 5.07. I had to bring that down to about 4.22, although I do think he'll be creating, it's going to be a low 4, probably around 4.25, but I do think he'll be creating big plays. He'll be getting some touchdowns that way. I've got him for 2 touchdowns. Those are never going to be goal line carries. I think all the goal line carries are going to be Howard. I think he's electric enough with his speed to create a few big plays, and I think he can take a few of those to the house. So that's why I've got him for what I've got him in terms of rushing game. But where the value comes in for Matt Breida is in the passing game. Chan Gailey, when he's an offensive coordinator in an offense, he gives over 100 targets to his running backs. He's had multiple seasons. I saw the stat on Twitter. I wish I could remember it 100% right now. But it's like 100 to 130 over the past 5 seasons that he's been an offensive coordinator, going towards his running backs. And so I think that's going to repeat itself. This is a team that's going to be down, I think, in games. That's how I see it. And so I don't think Howard's going to be on the ball or on the field late in the game. I think it's going to be Breida on the field late in the game, and they're going to have to get him the ball in space and utilize his speed. And he's shown he has receiving chops. However, in San Francisco, they just had multiple guys who could get out there and receive last year. They had Mostert and Tevin Coleman as well, competing for those receptions. And so this year, he's kind of the only guy. Patrick Laird is there, but he's a jag, in my opinion. And so I have Breida getting 64 targets. And with that, I think he's going to be able to create a good amount of fantasy points in half PPR and PPR leagues from his receptions alone. His receiving yards will be a big bonus, and he can get a few touchdowns that way, which is going to be big for a guy who's not getting a lot of rushing touchdowns. So I think Breida is the guy to own if you're in half PPR or full PPR in this backfield. And I think there's a real chance for him to have a big impact the way that we've seen running backs who catch the ball. They can be a value. People want those workhorse guys, but these guys can create value because, a target or a reception in fantasy football, if you're playing a full PPR, half PPR, it's roughly 3 times as important as a carry. So those are some big receptions that Breida could have this year, and that could be a huge impact for his fantasy value. In terms of receivers, there's nothing much else to say with Miami. The biggest thing that I was wanting to talk about was the running back room. Devontae Parker is going to be the one. Preston Williams, it sounds like he's healthy. He may take a few games to get going at the beginning of the season, but I think he'll be a solid number 2 for the year. The big question in terms of maybe dynasty leagues or something like that, this is actually supposed to be 16 there. I've got him projected for, is that Isaiah Ford, Jakeem Grant, they brought in Chester Rogers. All those guys are going to be fighting for that 3rd role because Allen Hurns and Albert Wilson have both opted out. So we'll see how that goes. For me, I see it being Isaiah Ford. He's kind of a Tyler Boyd cutout, in my opinion. He's obviously not nearly as big of a name, but in terms of some of his metrics and his skill set, he's similar to Tyler Boyd. And so I think he could be a solid slot player. So I have him winning out there with Jakeem Grant more or less just coming in to create some explosive plays and being a big special teams help. And then in tight end, with those opt-outs, the 2 guys I think that are benefiting the most, Breida, I already talked about him getting tons of receptions this year, but Gesicki and Preston Williams, they were kind of fighting with Allen Hurns and Albert Wilson. Yes, they would get more, but they were all kind of fighting for targets behind Devontae Parker. But I do think now with Allen Hurns and Albert Wilson opting out, you're going to see Preston. I gave him a slight uptick in targets. You see Gesicki, I gave him a slight uptick in targets. Gesicki actually takes a lot of his snaps out of the slot. So there's a chance there will be times in the field where it's just Parker and Williams on opposite sides and Gesicki running out of the slot. So I do think those guys will all get their fair share of targets this year. In terms of how that turns out in the rankings, not much that I'm off on or not much that I'm different on. you can kind of see the table yourself. Obviously, I am lower on Jordan Howard in PPR. That's because I don't see him being a workhorse in this offense. I think Breida will actually get a good chunk of work in this offense, which will limit what Howard can do, especially if they're behind in games. In terms of the receivers, I'm higher on all of them. I think this is going to be a high volume passing offense. And I actually like what Fitzpatrick can offer. Last year, in terms of fantasy, last year he was a good fantasy option in terms of supporting the fantasy receivers because he just has the balls to go throw it wherever he wants to on the field, and he's just going to try it. And so, in the NFL, that's maybe not the type of quarterback you want, but when he was in Tampa Bay, he was supporting multiple receivers there. Now that he's in Miami, last season, he was able to support Devontae Parker into a top 12 finish. I think he can support all these guys, all these targets. We're talking Parker, Williams, Gesicki, all three of them to better numbers than what they're being ranked for right now. So I'd be willing to take a shot on all those guys. I'm actually pretty in on this offense. And in terms of how this looks for Dynasty, Tua is the guy. He's going to be the quarterback of the future here. Fitz is on this one-year deal. It's going to be to play some of the games this year, and then Tua will take over, and it'll be his job. At running back, I think it's hard to project more than 1 year for either of these guys. Howard has an opt-out at $0. Like, they wouldn't have to pay anything to cut him after this season. So there's no guaranteed money for him, and so there's no guaranteed role for him. So Howard and Breida, they're the guys this year, but I would expect that, unless we hear news of an actual extension coming, they're going to end up drafting someone and or signing someone with the big running back kind of offseason coming up. In terms of receivers, I think, Parker's locked up long-term with guaranteed money. Preston Williams, he has not a lot of guaranteed money, but he's proven on the field what he can be. So they've got 2 years for cheap with a guy who's actually pretty talented. So I think those are going to be the main two to look at. Jakeem Grant is locked up long-term. However, I think that's more special teams. The reason he's getting paid what he is, because he's so electric with the ball in his hands. I think he's a guy that they're really paying for his special teams. And then Gesicki, they got a few years with Gesicki left on the deal. So I don't think this offense changes much, but I wouldn't be banking on any of the running backs in terms of Dynasty. Unless you're a win now team, you can go grab one. The receivers, I think they're fine plays, fine guys to pick up at their values. I don't think either of them are overpriced right now in Dynasty. I'd be willing to buy on both of them. And Gesicki, I think the hype train is there for him. There's definitely a drumbeat going for him this offseason, but I think he's he's pretty fairly priced right now. He's super athletic. He's going into year 3, and he showed a lot last year. So we'll kind of see how that goes from here. But I don't think, or that's kind of what I see for the Dynasty outlook, and I don't think anyone here is overly expensive or overpriced right now that I'd be avoiding. All right, next team, the Patriots. I actually don't have much to say about the Patriots because I really don't think this is a team that you're going to want to target in fantasy football in 2020 at all, because I just think there is so much uncertainty. And it's ironic I say that because something I was just talking about is value comes from uncertainty, because everyone gets knocked down. And then if one person can emerge from that, you've got yourself a value. And so, quarterback, it's Cam Newton. I think they're going to be a rush-heavy team this year with Cam. I think they're going to try to, Bill Belichick will show he will play to the strengths of his players. And so Cam Newton at quarterback, he's going to design this offense for Cam. They have a strong defense. I know they're still missing a few pieces now who've opted out. However, they still will be pretty solid. They still have a lot of big pieces there. So I think it's going to be kind of like the Steelers last year, where their offense isn't great, but their defense is really good. And so it's just not a team you don't want a ton of pieces. Now, Cam Newton, better than Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges for sure, and they'll be able to get more done on offense, but it's just not a sexy offense that you're going to want to be going after. So Cam, I think he'll be solid as a QB2. If you're playing in Superflex, Cam is actually a great pickup. I'm higher on him than general, I think, the general consensus. But for a 1 QB league, he's not more than like a streamer or a guy that you can pick up to rotate in with someone else. At the running back position, just run, and don't take any of them. At least that's how I feel. Something that I remember when I was a few years ago playing fantasy football, someone told me, Bill Belichick hates your fantasy team. He doesn't care about your fantasy team. Just never take a Bill Belichick running back. And Sony Michel for a little bit and James White, both of them, they were kind of proving that, like you could actually rely on a bit of production. Bill Belichick wasn't going to just be all over the place using Jonas Gray or any random person off the street to be their running back. But I think this year it's going back to that. You just don't know who it's going to be any given week, and I just would not be touching any of these guys. Sony Michel sounds like he's going to be on the pup to start the year. He's going to be injured. That's why I only have him projected for 10 games. I think he's going to miss the first 6, and that, you look at the numbers here, completely tanks his fantasy value for this year, at least over those first 6. Maybe you can pick him up when he comes back, but that would only be like as a desperate flex play. I really don't trust him. James White, he'll be solid-ish. Tom Brady boosted his value because Tom Brady trusted him, and Tom Brady throws to his guys. Cam Newton, yes, he threw the ball a lot to McCaffrey. I've seen that on Twitter, people saying, well, when he was in Carolina, Christian McCaffrey got a bunch of targets. He passes to the running back, but he didn't really pass to the running back a lot before McCaffrey showed up, and McCaffrey is just not the same as any other running back. He is a elite receiving threat who's also an elite running back. And so James White is just not that same player. So I don't think we're going to be seeing another 90, 100 target season for James White. I think he'll still get some. I've got him projected for 74, but that does lower his numbers down. You'll see over here from kind of that consistent where he could be your low-end RB2, but you could get him as a value later in drafts. I just don't think he's going to give you a ton of fantasy value this year. Lamar Miller, he's the new signing. Bill Belichick's systems are always complex. I don't think he's really going to do much this year besides be a filler for Sony Michel. That was a hint to me that Sony Michel will likely not be ready for the start of the season, because otherwise they would have been fine to go with Sony, James White, and Damian Harris and Rex Burkhead. But instead they don't. They go sign Lamar Miller. Damian Harris, I don't know why you draft this guy and never give him a chance. So I think he'll have some chances this season, but I just don't think he's going, unless he just takes the job and becomes the alpha over Sony Michel, James White, Lamar Miller, and Rex Burkhead, I don't trust him at all as well. You never know. He could have a week with 10 carries and gives you 10 to 15 fantasy points, and then the next week he'll have 2, and it's just too hard to predict. And then the other running back section, that's Rex Burkhead in there too. A guy who has shown he can be good in terms of his yards per carry and his receiving ability for this team. So I would just be a full avoid in this backfield. The receivers, there's not a ton to talk about in my opinion. Edelman comes down. He's not going to get the same amount of targets because this team just isn't going to pass nearly the same amount as what they did with Tom. He's still, look, the target percent, he's still getting 25% of the market share or the target percentage, because there's just not many guys in this offense to target, but that just doesn't accumulate a ton of fantasy points because this team, I don't think, is going to pass the ball much. So I'm lower on Edelman for the year. He's 33 years old now too. So he's just, he's starting to fall off. He's not a guy that we're going to be targeting much more, as more than a flex play, or maybe your wide receiver 3. N'Keal Harry, it should be exciting for him to have a chance with Cam Newton, right? Last year, I think reports were Tom Brady didn't trust him coming in halfway through the year. So hopefully he can build some rapport with Cam. That would be awesome for him. Sanu, he's just kind of a meh guy. I wouldn't really be targeting him because I don't think he has a lot of upside in fantasy. Myers may be a sleeper in Dynasty leagues. Tight ends, Lacoste opted out, so the door's open for Asiasi and Dalton Keene. But last year, New England was absolutely last in targets to the tight end, and I just don't see that really changing unless they have a really strong tight end. So this is how that looks in terms of my rankings compared to the ECR. You can pause and take a look. Realistically, like I said, I'm avoiding a lot of these guys. You can get Lamar Miller. The ECR is 101, so if you can get him at 50, I have him ranked somewhere in the 50s. If you can get him in the 70th running back, you can take him. But I don't think in a lot of redraft leagues you're even going to be wanting to go that deep into the running back pool. And I think those ECRs are only because Lamar Miller just got signed yesterday. So those will be coming up. Sony, I'm totally avoiding. I think those ECRs will go down because, like I said, the signing of Miller yesterday signed to me that Sony will not be ready. And then you got the receivers. Pretty fairly valued. Like I said, you could maybe get Edelman as your wide receiver 3 or a flex. That's kind of where those numbers come in. That 34 is a backhand 3 or a flex guy. So He could be useful. N'Keal Harry, he could break out. Calvin Benjamin was a big-bodied receiver who was really good in the red zone and contested catches, and Cam Newton made him pretty good. You look at Devin Funchess, kind of the same thing. So Cam Newton's not scared if he builds rapport to throw the ball to these guys. So N'Keal Harry, he's the one guy in this offense that I feel like could exceed expectations and has that ceiling play that's much higher than where you're buying him right now. And then Mohamed Sanu, I think he's just he's going to give you Sanu numbers. They're never sexy, and they're not really reliable, but he might get you 5 to 6 fantasy points a week. Asiasi, again, avoid. In terms of Dynasty, quarterbacks, I really don't know. I mean, Cam Newton, it's a 1-year deal for Cam. So it's going to be a real prove-it year for him. But, it would not surprise me if the reason the Patriots, they're looking not so great this year, they've had these opt-outs. Maybe they just don't play well, and then they end up getting a new quarterback for the next 20 years, whether it be Fields or Lawrence or the kid out of North Dakota State. I can't believe I'm forgetting it right now. No disrespect to him, but another great prospect. So quarterbacks, I wouldn't be buying any of them with the plan that they're going to be your long-term piece in a dynasty league. At running back, I would avoid all these guys. I wouldn't buy any of them in dynasty unless you can get Damian Harris for super cheap, which you probably could. I wouldn't mind throwing a 3rd-round rookie pick for Damian Harris and taking the chance on him this year, see what you've got with him. Generally, those 3rd-round rookie picks are pretty easy to pick up at other points throughout the year. You can toss them into deals and get it back if he's not really doing anything for you, but it could pay off if he does break out and show something. But again, not many guys I'm buying. Edelman, 34. Unless you're a absolute contender and you need those pieces, because depth will be important this year and you need pieces, you can go get them, but otherwise wouldn't be buying him. N'Keal Harry and Jacoby Myers are the receivers here that I think are interesting for the long term. Whoever that quarterback is, Myers maybe won't be there for it, but N'Keal Harry, he'll be around for 3 to 4 years, depending on what he shows if he gets that 5th-year option. So whether depends on who that new quarterback is, but if he can be the big target receiver for that new quarterback, there's the upside for Harry. And I do think, yes, he was injured last year, so there is still potential for him to be a good dynasty asset. And then at tight end, Asiasi and Keene are guys you can take chances on. I don't have them as elite talents in terms of coming out of the draft. People got really excited that New England drafted them, but I don't think that there's a huge impact on that anymore. I think the reason New England was so good with their tight ends was because who they had at tight end. So I don't think Asiasi and Keene are special, so they're not major targets for me in Dynasty. All right, last one. We're going to probably fly through this one. Not too much to say, but we got the New York Jets. The split, it's going to be a pretty balanced offense. Nothing too different from last year for what Adam Gase brought. Because it's the same type of offense and they really didn't bring in weapons, I don't think much changes for Sam Darnold. He's not going to be a guy you want in redraft. He's still a dynasty stash. But, 268 fantasy points and 6 point, that I believe is quarterback 27. So nothing special there. Running backs, I think Le'Veon Bell is a value this year. I think he's still going to get a great amount of targets because they don't have any receivers anymore. Or they do, but they lose Robbie Anderson. They replace him with Perryman. They don't really get much else to support as a weapon. So I think he'll get a good amount of targets again. And I think it sounds like he's ready to go. His efficiency is going to be up this year. I still only have him for 3.81 yards per carry, but he was so devastatingly bad last year in terms of yards per carry that this year a 3.81, which doesn't sound like a lot, boosts him a substantial amount. You're looking here, that's over a 20-point boost if he just has a very similar stat line in terms of his receptions and just gets less attempts, but just a better yards per carry with a few more touchdowns. So I'm in on Bell as a value play at where he's being drafted right now. The running backs, otherwise, Frank Gore and P. Ryan, they're fighting for a backup role that won't get on the field much. So it's nothing much other than if you're trying to handcuff Bell. I would take the upside with P. Ryan, even though I have Frank Gore statted out for more. I think Gore will have a fairly consistent role throughout the year. If Bell were to go down, I think P. Ryan and Gore would share the roles, but I think P. Ryan would be more explosive. In terms of receivers, Crowder is a great value. 128 or 122 targets last year. I've got him predicted for another 128 because really, who else is going to soak up those targets? Crowder has some rapport with Darnold. He's had some explosive games. I think last year he had a 17 target game. He's going to get the ball thrown his way, and he's going to be able to create a decent amount of fantasy volume for you as a consistent wide receiver 3 or flex option. I mean, you look at the numbers, he's very similar to what I have Julian Edelman projected for, and I believe you can get Crowder at least one round behind Edelman. So if you like Edelman, you like that type of player, I would just be waiting around, scooping up Crowder and getting the exact same value. Perriman, he steps into the Robbie Anderson role. He'll be okay. He'll give you some explosive weeks in a best ball draft. Maybe you take him because he has that ability to go downfield and grab those deep target touchdowns where he takes it deep to the house, like 40, 50, 60 yards, because he's got the speed and the athleticism to do it. But he's not going to be a volume guy. So, maybe a guy you want to pick up as depth in a standard league, but probably not much for half PPR or full PPR. Denzel Mims, a prospect I love, but the problem with Denzel Mims is he's super raw. And so this year, I don't think he can step in immediately and have a major role. And so, he'll have a decent role. 66 targets is pretty good. But he's more that long-term development type of prospect. And then the tight ends are interesting. I think Chris Herndon is a value tight end this year. I think he's a guy you can get for pretty cheap. And I would be targeting him. Like, he looked great in his rookie season. And then last year, he was only healthy for one game. And even for that game, it wasn't the full game. So you look at how excited people were about him after that first season. Now he's coming back. Last year, they actually used Ryan Griffin and Ryan Griffin had decent fantasy numbers in some games last year, so they figured out they know how to use their tight ends, and they do like to use their tight ends. So I think Herndon is a guy you can pick up as a tight end too, who could break out and become a fairly reliable tight end for you throughout the year as like a plug and play or streamer, or even a guy you're rotating with one other player based on matchup. So I like Herndon. Griffin, he's kind of like a handcuff, but if you're thinking about the idea this year that because of COVID you want to handcuff all your players, go ahead, handcuff Herndon with Griffin, but that would only be if you have like 9 or 10 or probably actually Dynasty League where you have a deep bench and you have the capabilities to do that. In terms of what this looks like for this season, like I said, Bell is my value pick at running back. No one else you need to own there. Darnold, he's really not a guy you need to own this year. Crowder, I think he can be a value pick at receiver, especially for where he's going. Perriman and Mims, probably just depth bench guys for redraft. And then Herndon and Griffin. Griffin, I have him as a value from where he's at because I do think he'll have a decent role. But tight end 34, 33, or 32, that will not move the needle for your team. So in redraft, you don't need to even look at him. But Herndon is a decent pick. In terms of the dynasty outlook, Sam Darnold is the guy. He's still only 23 years old. I don't like Adam Gase as a coach. That's just how it is for me. And so I hope that because Darnold has this upside, they replace Gase after potentially another bad season. And Sam Darnold is still going to be the guy of the future then, and he gets a chance with a better coaching staff, coaching regime to be successful. So I think right now he's probably a decent value. I think during the year he'll be an even better value. You'll be able to sell the owner on, look, man, he's not shown anything. It's 3 years in. Like, the owner will be frustrated if they've held Darnold for this long, and you might be able to come scoop him up mid-season before anything changes in the coaching staff. And then when that coaching staff changes, I think there's a bright future for Darnold still somewhere in this league. Running backs, Le'Veon Bell, he has that 3-year contract, but he has a potential out after this season. He's a tough one. Right now, I'm treating him like a 1-year running back. He's already 28 years old. Running backs do fall off at that point. Obviously, last year he had a brutal year. We were talking about his yards per carry already. So I would be treating him as if he's a 1-year guy who they're going to get out from under after the season. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he has a great season. But if you're a dynasty owner, keep that in mind. I think there's a good chance this could be his last year with the Jets and potentially in a solid role anywhere. Frank Gore, 1-year rental. The Michael Pirine, not a special talent, more just like a backup guy. If they got out of the Bell contract after this year, I don't think Pirine would really have a shot for the number 1 role. I think they would just draft someone else or sign someone else. Like I said, this offseason is going to be a crazy running back offseason, tons of talent available. So I do think it would never be Pirine's job really, but if you have Bell, handcuff him with Pirine. If something were to happen to Bell, maybe you get something out of Pirine this year, a showing out of Pirine, and he carries some value. Receivers, Crowder, I still think he's a value in Dynasty. He's got these 2 years left on his deal. The potential out for $1 million is there. Yes, $11.5 million is a lot of money, so maybe they would choose to exercise that. But I just don't think – I think he's going to be the leading receiver hands down. as long as he's healthy, I think there's no chance anyone beats him in terms of targets on this team. So he's too useful for them to buy out. So I think you got 2 years out of Crowder as a solid player who's still a very good age, who could even get extended. Perriman, he's a 1-year rental. So in Dynasty, not a guy that I'm really buying. Denzel Mims, a great prospect, someone who prospect value for a receiver, generally speaking, is lowest during his first season because he was super hyped up in the offseason. Then they go into year one and they probably don't have much of a role, and teams are trying to win, and everyone's mindset is, I need to buy the players to win now. This season is happening, and they kind of forget the long-term effect or the long-term play. And so Mims is a great talent. I think he's got the raw capabilities of like a Julio Jones, and that sounds crazy, but I'm telling you, athletically, he can be that. He has a lot to polish before he gets anywhere near that. I'm just saying, though, like his upside is elite, and a guy who, if you can buy him at a decent price, especially mid-season, or especially if people are just frustrated with the Jets offense, I would be buying. And then at tight end, it's going to be Herndon and Griffin for a while. I mean, Herndon is a value pick for them right now to own. So I think he'll be around for a couple years. Griffin, they just re-signed. So those are going to be the guys at tight end. So if you want to take a chance on Herndon, I think he's a decent dynasty buy. So that wraps up the AFC East. And so I wanted to show you finally kind of what that looks like. So these are sorted by 6-point touchdowns and half PPR for all the other positions. So you can pause it anywhere you want, but I've highlighted all the guys we've talked about. You can see where they rank in comparison to other players on the list. So, Josh Allen, Cam Newton, Sam Darnold, Ryan Fitzpatrick, and Tua Tagovailoa is still on that list. You're seeing the running backs and receivers now. Not a lot of guys in this division who are going to be making a lot of impact for you, but these are the types of guys who can be kind of your back end wide receiver 3s, running back 2s, flexes. But yeah, this is how they stack up in case you're interested to see kind of who they are around. And there you go. So there's the bottom of it. You can pause at any point and check those out. So anyway, I know this was a little bit long. I'm going to try to shorten them up as we go through the divisions, be a bit more concise, but I just felt this was a good way for me to talk to you and just be completely open about everything that I'm seeing this year. So if you have any questions, make sure to drop them in the comment section or tweet me at Sawyer_FF, and I will be 100% excited to get back to you. Take care, and we'll see you later this week.